Imagine that the story you have known your whole life has been distorted. That the chief traitor in the entire Christian tradition, Judas Iscariot, has not only been misunderstood, but also deliberately portrayed as an enemy in order to hide a deeper, more inconvenient truth. Now imagine that there is a text that turns all this upside down. A text buried for centuries, destroyed, cursed, and now restored and translated. The Gospel of Judas. The forbidden gospel that changes everything we thought about Judas and about Jesus himself. There is no kiss of betrayal in it, no silver coins as a reward for meanness. In it, Judas is not a criminal, but the only one who understood his master. While the other disciples take Jesus literally, superficially, Judas sees the depths. Jesus reveals to him a secret. The real world is spiritual, and the body is only a prison. And to be freed, the soul must be given. And Judas is the one who fulfills this mission. He does not betray, but sacrifices, because that is what Jesus asks for. You will say, this is some kind of heresy. But wait, this document was discovered not by dreamers, but by researchers. It was not preserved in some section of conspiracy theorists, but in the archives of the Vatican and in the hands of international scholars. The translation was published by the National Geographic Society. This is not fiction. This is a real document dated to the 2nd century, so old that it was probably written when there were still living witnesses of the first Christian communities. And here is the most interesting thing. The Gospel of Judas describes a completely different reality. Not traditional Christianity, but the world of Gnosticism, an ancient spiritual teaching that believed that the material world was created by a lower deity, and the true God is hidden, bright, and distant. It is to him that Jesus aspires. It is about him that Judas speaks. It is to him that betrayal serves, which turns out to be an act of supreme loyalty. We are accustomed to the picture. Judas is a symbol of betrayal, corruption, cruelty. But what if this picture is false? What if Judas is the only one who truly understood Jesus? The only one who went to the end? Who played the most difficult role, not because he wanted fame or money, but because it was necessary? What if Judas became the most devoted disciple, and therefore had to be disgraced? Now imagine that this story was hidden intentionally, that church councils declared Gnosticism a heresy not because it was false, but because it was too complex, too free, too dangerous for a rigidly centralized doctrine. The Gospel of Judas was destroyed, persecuted, forgotten, and now again among us. In this video you will see not only the text itself, but also everything that surrounds it. The history of its discovery, its content, its theological implications, and, most importantly, a deep moral dilemma. Perhaps we are not just looking at an apocrypha. Perhaps this is the key to one of the greatest religious paradoxes. The question now is not whether Judas is right, but are we ready, 2,000 years later, to face the truth? It all began not in biblical times, not in Jerusalem, and not even in the catacombs of the early Christians, but in a poor Egyptian village somewhere in the 1970s. Under the hot sun, among the sands and ruins, a local peasant came across a cave. Inside was a stone vessel. Inside the vessel were rolls of papyrus wrapped in leather. He did not know what he was holding in his hands. To him, it was just old junk. But to the world, it was a time bomb. It turned out that in his hands was an ancient manuscript. The Chacos Codex, this is what this find would later be called. It contained several texts, but the main one among them was the one that would shake the religious world. The Gospel of Judas. The find immediately fell into the hands of antiquarians and black dealers in antiquities. For several years, the manuscript was transported from place to place, hidden, sold, and in the meantime it was deteriorating. The valuable papyrus, which had lain for almost 2,000 years in a stable environment, began to literally crumble in the hands due to the modern air. When the manuscript finally reached scientists, many pages had already been destroyed. But even what was saved was enough. In 2006, the world heard a sensation. The text, which was mentioned in the works of the early Christian writer Irenaeus of Lyons in the 2nd century, really exists. It is not fiction, not a myth. This is a real text, a real gospel with real origins in the 2nd century. Strikingly, there is not a single word in the text about the 30 pieces of silver, not a single detail about the kiss of betrayal. Instead, there are dialogues between Jesus and Judas. The other disciples are portrayed as unintelligible, limited. They cannot comprehend the true nature of Jesus. But Judas can. He sees that Jesus is not just a prophet, not just a teacher, but a being of light who has come from a higher realm. And Jesus asks Judas to do what others cannot. You will surpass all others, because you will sacrifice the body in which I am. Jesus says to Judas in this text. This does not sound like betrayal. This sounds like a mission. And here we are faced with an incredible dilemma. What if everything we knew about Judas was not just a mistake, but manipulation? What if someone, at some point, deliberately labeled him a traitor in order to simplify a complex truth, so that control over faith would be easier? The more convenient it is to have an enemy, the easier it is to control the masses. But that is not all. The text found in the desert is written in Coptic, but apparently translated from a Greek original. And the Greek original most likely dates back to 140 to 160 AD. This is not far from the time of the creation of the canonical Gospels. And if so, then the version of Judas could have existed in parallel with the others, even before the formation of the church canon. That is, Judas had a chance to be not a traitor, but an alternative hero of Christian history. And then, at the deepest level, we will have to reconsider the very essence of faith. Because if Judas did not betray, then who is he? To understand why the Gospel of Judas is so different from the canonical texts, we need to look into the spiritual world from which it comes. This is the world of the Gnostics, ancient thinkers whose faith was brilliant and dangerous at the same time. The word gnosis in Greek means knowledge, but this is not bookish, not academic knowledge. This is inner, secret, intuitive knowledge. The Gnostics believed that the world in which we live was not good and was not created by the true God. They believed that the material world was a prison, and it was not created by the Almighty depicted in the Bible, but by a lower deity, the so-called demiurge. According to this philosophy, the true God is distant, pure, outside the physical world, and the human soul is a spark of this God, locked in the body, as in a cage. The purpose of life is to remember one's true nature, to wake up, to find gnosis, and to return home, to the world of light. According to this vision, Jesus is not just the incarnation of God, but a messenger from that higher world who came to awaken humanity. He did not teach literal commandments, but showed the way to inner awakening. For the Gnostics, the crucifixion was not a tragedy. It was liberation. They believed that Jesus had a dual nature, the body as an illusion, and the true spiritual I, which did not suffer, but was freed at the moment of death. And now, the main thing. In the Gnostic Gospel of Judas, Jesus openly says, "The body is a trap, and only the one who understands this truth will be able to get out of it." Judas is the only one of the disciples who is able to accept this. He is the one who is not afraid to take a painful, incomprehensible step. And that is why Jesus chooses him. In this light, Judas is not a traitor, but a liberator. Not a sinner, but an initiate. Not the one who betrayed Jesus, but the one who helped him complete his spiritual mission. The other disciples in the text are depicted as incomprehensible, attached to the material. They offer animal sacrifices, worship a false god, and do not see the true kingdom. Jesus, according to the Gospel of Judas, even laughs at them. Not out of hatred, but out of pity. They are still asleep, and Judas has already woken up. That is why Jesus says to him, "You will sacrifice the man who carries me." This is not a curse. This is a consecration. And here the question arises, how could the church accept such a version? No way. She could not, because this version is too bold, too free, too internal. It does not give simple answers. It demands awakening, and that is why it was declared a heresy. But if the Gnostics were wrong, then why does their gospel sound so profound? Why is Jesus in it so familiar, and at the same time different? Why is Judas so contradictory, but does not cause disgust, as in the traditional description? And what if we are simply afraid to accept the truth that the spiritual path is not always the path of glory, recognition, and purity? That sometimes it is the path of darkness, misunderstanding, and sacrifice? That Judas became a shadow because he took on the most difficult role? Why Judas? Why not Peter, James, or John, whom we know as the closest to the Master? Why was the darkest, most disturbing role given to Judas Iscariot? Was this foreseen? Or perhaps Jesus knew much more than we imagine? In the canonical Gospels, we read how Jesus says, "One of you will betray me," and all the disciples are afraid. "Is it I, Lord?" Everyone asks. But let us think. If Jesus knew who exactly would betray him, why didn't he stop him? Why didn't he expel Judas? Why didn't he expose him openly? And most importantly, why didn't he try to save him? The answer may lie not in words, but in silence. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus not only does not get indignant, he initiates this betrayal. He reveals to Judas depths that others do not see. And not because Judas is better, smarter, or holier, but because he is willing to accept the uncomfortable truth. Willing to be hated. Ready to do what no one else wants. Because this is not betrayal. This is sacrifice. Perhaps the hardest of all. Jesus entrusts Judas not only with life, but also with death. He entrusts not only with his body, but also with the plan of salvation. Because without death, there will be no resurrection. Without darkness, there will be no light. Without the one who betrays, there will be no fulfillment of prophecy. And here we are faced with the mystery of choice. The God who is betrayed, and at the same time the God who himself allows this betrayal. The disciple who carries out the order, and becomes cursed for 1,000 years. From the beginning, the church tried to find a logical explanation. They say Judas loved money. 30 pieces of silver are a symbol of greed. But what if money was only a tool? What if it is not about the silver, but about the role that needed to be played? Let us remember, Jesus does not just accept his death, he goes to it consciously. He knows when, where, and how everything will happen. His conversation with Judas is not an accident, but a dialogue between those who understand the essence. The only ones of the 12. Now let's look at Judas in the last hours. He comes to the Garden of Gethsemane. He knows what will happen next, but he does not hide, does not run away. He approaches Jesus and kisses him. It is a kiss, but what kind of kiss is this? A symbol of betrayal or a final farewell? Is it a sign? I have done as you asked? And what does Jesus do? Push him away? Curse him? No. He says, "Friend, why have you come?" This word, friend, is not taken out of context. This is the direct speech of Jesus. And if he calls Judas a friend at the moment of greatest pain, can it be just a random word? And what if it is recognition, gratitude, farewell, a conscious return of love for the act that opens the way to Golgotha? In the Gospel of Judas, these moments take on a new meaning. We no longer see Judas as a monster. We see a person, a disciple, a victim, an instrument. We see the chosen one, and at the same time the doomed one. The one who agreed to go into darkness so that Jesus could ascend into the light. And this forces us to ask ourselves a painful question again. If Judas is not a traitor, then who is he? And if what we called betrayal was obedience, then what will we now call faith? The history of Christianity is not only the history of faith, martyrdom, and grace. It is also the history of struggle. The history of choice, what to keep and what to destroy. What to consider the Word of God and what to consider heresy. The history of the formation of the canon is a process that, contrary to popular belief, was not instantaneous and did not descend from heaven in the form of a list of 27 books. In fact, the canon of the New Testament was formed over several centuries, through disputes, councils, the influence of emperors, and church politics. In the first 2 centuries of Christianity, different communities used different gospels. Some had Mark and Matthew. Some had the Gospel of Thomas. Some had Peter. Even the Gospel of Judas, although less common, was known. It is mentioned in Irenaeus of Lyons, one of the first church fathers, who openly condemned the Gnostics and their texts as early as the 2nd century. And here the main thing begins. Gnosticism, a faith that developed in parallel with Orthodox Christianity, was too dangerous. It did not have a rigid hierarchy. It did not recognize the authority of the church as an institution. The Gnostics sought truth within themselves, in their hearts, in their personal experience of God. They believed that every soul had a connection with the source of light, and that no priest was an intermediary between man and God. Such a position was a threat to any centralized structure. And the church understood this. Therefore, in the 3rd to 4th centuries, a determined struggle for control over the truth takes place. Alternative gospels are destroyed. They are called pseudo-gospels. Those who read them are declared heretics. And gradually, at the councils, in particular the Laodicean, Carthage, etc., a list of permitted texts is determined. The Gospel of Judas is not on this list. It was too free, too spiritual, too dangerous. In it, Jesus is not the one the church wanted to present. There is no crucifixion as a sacrifice for sin. There is no resurrection in the flesh. There are no rituals, structures, duties. There is only inner light, knowledge, gnosis. And most importantly, Judas is not a traitor there, which means there is no image of an enemy through which obedience, humility, and suffering can be taught. Judas in the Gnostic gospel is a challenge. It breaks the pattern. It makes you think. And that is why it is dangerous. For a faith based on clear black and white boundaries, it is a threat. Because there is no black evil in it. There is tragedy. There is an internal struggle. There is love, which is manifested in an action that the world called betrayal. And this is exactly what the church could not allow. Judas was easier to curse than to understand. It was easier to make him a symbol of evil than a symbol of painful truth. And therefore, the text that paints a different reality was declared heresy. Forbidden, destroyed, forgotten, and only thanks to chance, a papyrus that survived in the sands of Egypt, we can today once again look into where we were not allowed for centuries, and ask ourselves the same question that the fathers of the church feared. What if Judas was right? What is really written in the Gospel of Judas? After so many centuries of silence, dust, and oblivion, we finally open the pages of the text that the church wanted to erase from the face of the earth. And here we are presented with a picture that is not just different. It is astonishing, moving, frightening, and confusing. Jesus is not at all like in the usual Gospels. He is not just a teacher who teaches the crowds, not a prophet who preaches on the mounts, and not even a God who works miracles. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus is an otherworldly being, a light from on high who has come into the darkness of the world to awaken the chosen ones. His disciples, those who surround him, are depicted as blind, unintelligible. They think of glory, of sacrifices, of rituals, and Jesus looks at them and laughs. Yes, the text mentions several times, Jesus smiled, or even Jesus laughed, but not because he is having fun, but because he sees they did not understand anything. They are still in darkness. One of the episodes begins like this. When Jesus appeared on earth, he performed miracles and great signs for the salvation of mankind. Some walked the paths of righteousness, but others sinned. The very first phrases give a sense of a different style. Here, Jesus is not a figure of flesh and blood, but a cosmic Messiah who came from the upper world. The most dramatic fragment is Jesus' dialogue with Judas. There Jesus says, "Separate the others from me, and I will reveal to you the secrets of the kingdom. You will surpass all, because you will sacrifice the man who carries me." This is a key phrase. Pay attention. The man who carries me. Jesus does not say me in the literal sense. He says that his true essence is outside the body. The body is just a shell, and Judas must be the one to release him. This does not look like betrayal. This looks like a mission, like an initiation, like a spiritual task. At the same time, Jesus says of the other disciples, "Their souls are old, and they will not be able to see the kingdom." He criticizes them for worshiping a false god, sacrificing animals, and seeking material power. All this sounds very Gnostic. The Gnostics believed that the true God is not the one depicted in frescoes and icons. He is not the one who created the world, because the world is imperfect, full of suffering, and true salvation is to escape from this world. This is what Jesus teaches Judas, but only him, no others. Jesus says, "There is no generation of angels of men that will know the truth. Only you will receive it, Judas." In this context, Judas appears not as a traitor, but as the chosen one, as the one who understands, the one who sees what others do not see. And this breaks everything. This destroys the image of Judas as a symbol of meanness. This forces us to look at him again as the one who agreed to die not only for Jesus, but also for himself, because he knew he would be hated, he would be cursed, his name would be spoken with contempt for centuries. But he accepted it, because he saw above, he saw the essence. Jesus also says to Judas, "You will become the 13th, symbolically, because 13 is not just a number. It is beyond the 12, outside the system. Judas is the one who stands aside, separately, and that is why he is closer to the truth. At the end of the text, we see Judas retires. He talks to the high priests, and they give him money. But this is not described as a malicious deal. This is part of the path. Everything that happens is not chaos. It is a plan, mysterious, deep, painful, but a plan. And most importantly, there is no scene of Judas' repentance, suicide, rope. There is only silence, and the feeling that Judas went into darkness, consciously, so that others could see the light. Judas is one of the most famous names in history, and at the same time, one of the most hated. His name is sworn by, cursed. It has become synonymous with betrayal in all the languages of the world. But have you ever wondered how exactly this image was formed? And why is it so absolute, almost demonic? In the canonical Gospels, Judas is silent. His presence is felt, but not revealed. He appears in separate scenes, says little. In the Gospel of Mark, the first of the canonical, his betrayal is described briefly, without details. He simply agrees with the high priests and betrays Jesus. In Matthew, the 30 pieces of silver appear, and it is here that we first see repentance. Judas returns the money, throws it in the temple, and hangs himself. Luke describes Judas as possessed by Satan, John as the devil from the beginning. And we see how with each evangelist the image of Judas becomes darker. In the first texts, he is a man who did something wrong. But later, he is already a symbol of evil, to the point that in medieval treatises Judas is placed next to Lucifer. But why? Where did this demonization begin? The church understood very early on, the image of Judas is convenient. Because if Jesus was to die for the sins of humanity, someone was needed to deliver him. And to emphasize the price of salvation, it was necessary to make the one who betrayed Christ a symbol of evil, an absolute traitor. All this served the doctrine good and evil, Christ and Judas, God and the devil, light and darkness. But Judas in the apocryphal gospel does not fit into this scheme. He is complex. He cannot be easily condemned, because if his actions were not an act of greed, but the embodiment of Jesus' commission, then who is he? The answer is too disturbing, because if Judas did what was necessary, then his curse is unjust. If he was a messenger, then his suicide is a tragedy. If he did Jesus' will, then the entire canonical image begins to waver, and with it, the entire structure of the church's understanding of salvation. Look deeper. Judas is the only disciple whose sin seems unforgivable. Peter also betrayed Jesus 3 times, at the decisive moment, but he was forgiven. Thomas doubted, but he was not rejected, and Judas is cursed forever. Why? Is it because his role was too profound to be accepted? Is it because his choice was too controversial to be accepted into church dogma? In the Gospel of Judas, we see a completely different perspective. Here, there are no silver coins, no contempt. There is dialogue. There is understanding. There is trust. Jesus addresses Judas as the only one who is able to bear the burden of truth. There is tragic greatness in this image. This is Judas, who accepts the role of a traitor, knowing that his name will be cursed. This is Judas, who sacrifices himself not physically, but morally, spiritually, historically. He takes on himself a sin that he did not commit, because this is exactly what is needed for a plan that most will not understand. And this is precisely the greatest paradox. In the canonical texts, Judas is the one who betrayed, and in the Apocrypha, the one who was betrayed, not Jesus. And Judas himself was betrayed by humanity, not wanting to see his true face. And perhaps the greatest drama is that we are used to judging instead of listening, cursing instead of understanding. And suddenly it is time to question all this. Did he have a choice? Fate, sacrifice, and the view of God. And now, the most painful, the question that has tormented theologians, philosophers, and believers for centuries. Did Judas have a choice? Could he refuse? Did he have a chance to say no? And if he did, then why did he agree? And if he did not, is it fair? For what kind of story is this, in which a person is destined from the very beginning to be a traitor? Without a chance, without mercy, without correction. How can you live with the thought that your fate is a curse? And can a loving God allow this? If we believe that God is just, that he does not wish evil, that he is the source of love and truth, then how could a soul appear in his plan that was used, despised, and thrown into the dustbin of history? And what if Judas was not used? If he chose his own path? If he agreed? If there was an agreement between him and Jesus invisible to others? And this agreement was not betrayal, but mutual understanding. A secret alliance. A sacred agreement. In the Gospel of Judas we see exactly this. Jesus addresses him not as an enemy, but as an initiate. He says, "You will sacrifice the man who carries me. This is not a curse. This is an assignment." And then Judas appears not as a puppet, but as a participant in the plan, as the performer of a role that others refuse to play. And it is here that the deepest truth is revealed. Not every dark act is evil, and not every light act is good. Sometimes, in order for light to come to pass, someone must plunge into darkness. Judas is not simply the one who betrayed Jesus. He is the one who took on the hatred of the whole world, knowing that it was necessary. And in this sense, he is a hero. Tragic, lonely, incomprehensible, but a hero. Then another question arises. Does God really have traitors? If God is omnipresent and omnipotent, if everything goes according to his will, then how could there be someone who broken the plan? If Judas' betrayal led to salvation, to the cross, to resurrection, then this was part of the path. Then can we call it betrayal? Isn't the term traitor itself a human label, created for convenience, for manipulation, to explain the incomprehensible? In the Bible, God often uses darkness to achieve light. Joseph is sold by his brothers, but this saves the entire nation. Moses is sent into the wilderness so that he may hear the voice of God. Saul persecutes Christians but becomes Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. Then Judas is no exception. He is part of the story, part of the plan. But the worst thing is that we not only did not understand his story, we distorted it. We left no room for compassion. We did not give him a chance for forgiveness. We decided that his name should become a curse. But if God is merciful, then did he not forgive Judas too? If Christ said on the cross, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," then why wouldn't he say this about Judas too? Maybe he already said it. We just didn't hear it. Maybe there was no betrayal in the kiss with which Judas met Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Maybe it was a sign, "I have done your will." And maybe that is why Jesus does not push him away. He does not scold him, but calls him a friend. "Friend, why have you come?" he asks. And in these words there is all the depth. Because only a true friend can agree to be hated so that love can come true. Can Judas be forgiven? A look of love that is above justice. And here we come to a question that has been silenced for centuries. A question that even believers are afraid to ask. Because it is too bold, too uncomfortable, too deep. Can Judas be forgiven? The one who is considered a traitor. The one whose name has become a curse. The one who was struck out of heaven. Does he have a chance? In the canon, the answer is obvious. No. His sin is the greatest. He betrayed God himself. His death is suicide. And this is a sin against life. Everything speaks against him. But is everything really? Let's remember another moment. Jesus is on the cross, beaten, humiliated, chained. Around him is a mocking crowd, soldiers dividing his clothes, the disciples who fled. And then he says one of the greatest sentences in all of human history. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Is it about the Romans? About the high priests? About the crowd? Yes, but isn't it also about Judas? Because if Jesus asks the Father to forgive those who nailed him to the cross, isn't he also asking to forgive the one who led him to Gethsemane? We don't see the scene in detail, but in Jesus' words there is all forgiveness. There are no exceptions. And if Christ's love is truly boundless, doesn't it also encompass Judas? Perhaps Judas' greatest tragedy is not that he betrayed, but that he did not believe that he could be forgiven. And that is why he went and hanged himself. His despair was so great that he did not see the light even in the Master's words. Or perhaps no one allowed him to see this light. For from the first century and to this day we repeat, Judas is a traitor. Judas is without hope. But what if we were wrong? What if Judas was not inferior to the other apostles? What if he did what he had to do? And if Christ really came not for the righteous, but for sinners? Then to whom, if not to Judas, did he bring hope? And now imagine, what if in the last moment of his life Judas remembered the look of Jesus? The same look with which the Master looked at him when they sat together at supper. A look in which there was not condemnation, not anger, but sadness and love. "What you are doing, do it quickly," Jesus said then. Not as an accusation, but as acceptance, as awareness, as consent. In this phrase, permission, and perhaps a blessing. And then Judas, holding the silver pieces, understands that it's not about the money, not about the Romans, not about the crowd, but about that deep, unspeakable tragedy that no one but him will understand. And so he throws the silver in the temple, and leaves, and does what to many looks like an escape. But how was it? A sacrifice? The last act? And now we ask ourselves this painful question again. Was Judas a traitor or a martyr? Was he a servant of darkness, or a witness to the light that burns from within? And didn't we ourselves condemn him to eternal oblivion, because we couldn't accept that betrayal is not always evil, that love sometimes has the appearance of horror, that obedience does not always lead to glory, and sometimes to damnation, but even in damnation, God remains, and if his love is truly eternal, then perhaps Judas is not in hell, and in a quiet place where souls who were not understood will find peace. Why is this story important right now? The truth that sets us free. We have come a long way, from the first words about the forbidden gospel to the profound questions about justice, about choice, about mercy. We have looked into the face of the one we have feared and hated for centuries. We have seen Judas again, not as a demon, but as a human being. And now the question is before each of us. What will we do with this truth? Because this story is not only about Judas. It is about each of us. About the moments when we did not understand God's will. About the choices that seemed right to us but the world condemned. About love that is manifested not in words, but in sacrifices. About the truth that does not fit into dogma. The gospel returned from Judas not by chance. It was buried and resurrected, forgotten and found, the silent and the proclaimed, like Jesus himself who went through death to give new life. Perhaps that is why this text appeared precisely in our time. At a time when we are no longer afraid to ask questions. At a time when truth no longer lives only in temples, but in hearts. Because if we truly seek God, we will have to accept that God does not fit into frames. He is not only in the canon, not only in the established. He is in doubts, in pain, in those who were not understood. In the one we called a traitor, and he called a friend. This voice that sounds from the depths of the text of Judas is not the voice of a rebel. It is the voice of a man who has been silent for 2,000 years. And now he has spoken, not to destroy faith, but to remind us, truth is always deeper than we think. And love is always stronger than we expect. Because if even Judas can be understood, then who has truly lost hope? This story teaches, do not rush to judge. The one you consider an enemy may turn out to be a hero. The one you cursed may be the chosen one. The one who remained silent may have the greatest truth. And, perhaps, it is in such figures that God leaves his deepest traces. So the next time you say, Judas, stop, think, look not up, not at the ground, but at yourself, because perhaps a little bit of Judas lives in each of us, in our doubts, in our falls, in our difficult decisions, and it is there mercy is born. It is there, Jesus says, friend, why have you come? Not for a curse, but for the truth, not for betrayal, but for salvation, and perhaps, from this very moment, forgiveness begins.